Hello and welcome to The View with me, Martin Gregory, the podcast that talks about old television shows that only you and I are watching these days. And of course, we throw in a few audiobook reviews as well. Today on the podcast, I will be talking about a fake version of Disney's Jungle Book. I will also be talking about the Demon Headmaster on audio, and I'll also be talking about The Man in Room 17, the classic British television series, and how it all began. That's a bit of research, a sneak preview from my book, if you like. So just starting off now then, let's get going with an audiobook review of The Demon Headmaster. Now, The Demon Headmaster, it's something of a phenomenon, isn't it? The original novel, printed in about 1984, has spawned several sequels, adaptations, and the books continue to be re-released and enjoyed by new readers in the 21st century. The Demon Headmaster is, of course, the first and arguably the best book in the series. And it all starts when Dinah Glass is adopted by the Hunter family. Lloyd Hunter and his timid younger brother Harvey don't take to Dinah at first, especially as she's likely to be one of them. The dreaded them are the other children of the school, strangely unlike any children Dinah has ever met before. So well behaved, so organised, so ordered, and they all love the headmaster. It is easy to see why this story is such a classic. Gillian Cross creates such a palpable feeling of unease in the early chapters. Dinah's first encounters with the bat-like headmaster, with his heavy teacher's gown, pale white skin and deep sea-green eyes, is thoroughly goosebump-inducing. Doing the headmaster's dirty work are the school prefects, who are quite a sadistic bunch to be found in a children's story. Whether some of their actions, such as pushing poor, defenceless, frail Harvey face down into a mound of snow, may be omitted from later versions of the book, I really cannot say. But this incident does set up a memorable act of betrayal from Dinah. The snow day is actually my favourite chapter from the story, because none of the children, the brains as Harvey and Lloyd call them, would dare mess about on the way to school. Such is the influence of the headmaster. Except Dinah. By this point, she knows the headmaster is hypnotising the pupils of the school and feels a tiny bit cross with herself for being just as susceptible as the other children. There's a little arrogance here because Harvey, Lloyd and their friends Ian, Mandy and Ingrid are the only ones immune to the headmaster's hypnotism, and they have formed a little clique to help them deal with the state of things. But Dinah is clever, really, really clever, as she says at one point. So how come her high brain is so easily conquered and their lesser brains are not? Thankfully, we have militant Lloyd to thank for tearing down such high and mighty smoothness. And I think, really, Lloyd is the standout character for me. He's very reactive and quick to become irritated, but he's also quite level-headed and really is that friend that a lot of us have, the kind of friend who speaks his mind and refuses to be silenced. Of course, it isn't long before the headmaster realises he has a genius in his midst, that's Dinah, and begins to unroll his plan. So when the children learn that Eddie Hare and his zany Friday afternoon quiz show will be visiting the school, they are mostly forbidden from being excited. And Dinah wonders why the headmaster, with his unquenchable zeal for order, should invite madcap Eddie Hare and the entire television circus to his school. Then Dinah remembers what happens at the end of the quiz each week. After the brightest minds of two opposing schools have battled it out, the headmaster of the winning school gets a few minutes to talk to the camera. Usually, headmasters might congratulate their clever quiz-winning pupils, share a moral or two, or just thank Eddie and his team for making it a memorable day. But Dinah knows a few minutes talking to the camera is all it will take for every child watching to fall under the influence of the headmaster. A spoiler-free review, so I'm not going to reveal what happens at the end and whether Dinah, with the help of Harvey, Lloyd and the rest of the Splat team, managed to foil the headmaster's plans. But I will say that parents who are sensitive about such things may wish to know that there are no outdated stereotypes in Gillian Cross's story. Lloyd may come off a little spikier than he appeared to audiences of the 1980s, but actually he's good value and bears much of the story's moral compass. This is a story squarely aimed at children, so there's absolutely nothing unsuitable in the slightest, as you would probably expect. The aforementioned section where Harvey is pushed in the snow isn't really all that shocking, and it's only because Harvey is such a sweetie that makes the moment feel so tough. This audiobook is the full unabridged story, that I've listened to, and it clocks in just under 3 hours, so it's a bit of a marathon run there. 3 hours is, of course, a long time to be in the company of one narrator, but we are in safe hands with the narrator of this story, Judy Bennett. She was once a regular reader of audiobooks and does a fine job here. If anything, you may find her voices for the children are a little too good. I first heard this audiobook. We're going to play this game? Yeah, go on, let's play this game then. The game's called How Old Can We Make Martin Feel Today? So off we go then. I first heard this audiobook, shall we just say Fnarg years ago and leave it at that? So I first heard this audiobook Fnarg years ago when I was in school, and I used to get it from the school library. And it was such a popular audiobook, you had to book it weeks in advance, and you could only have it for 1 week, and that was your lot. It wasn't until this was recently uploaded to YouTube, so there you are, that's where you can hear this audiobook on YouTube. It wasn't until it was uploaded to YouTube that I was able to hear the story again. And it was just a wonderful experience because it brought back a lot of memories, mostly of me in my room being eternally sad with my bookish interests. But gosh, they were happy times, and this audiobook brings it all back. So the audiobook, of course, it's on YouTube, as I said, and it's also available from Audible, and can probably be found in other places too, so do look. Now, I'm going to talk about a version of Jungle Book that I recently transferred from DVD onto my hard drive. How it got onto DVD was via a VHS cassette tape. And the VHS cassette tape used to belong to my nan and granddad. And nan and granddad no longer with us, but I have happy memories of watching this tape. So it is a fake version of Jungle Book, so not the Disney version, and it was released on Pickwick Video around 1990. Now, this particular video cassette was one of a selection of about 10 videos that Nan and Grandad had in their house when they finally got their first video recorder installed, which must have been in the early 90s, I think. I remember their TV used to be in the corner of the living room, to the right of the window as you look out, to the left of the fireplace. And the tapes in Nan and Grandad's videotape drawer were, if I remember correctly, or included, Lady and the Tramp, Pavarotti, Charlotte Church, the Phantom of the Opera, the Tom Hanks film Turner and Hooch, and this fake Jungle Book. So as I said, this is not the Disney Jungle Book, but when the video was released, this video that is, Disney had yet to re-release their film on video. A couple of years later, I think, after The Lion King had come out, so we're talking about 95 here, Jungle Book was eventually re-released into the cinema. That's the Disney Jungle Book. Myself and my mum and my brother saw it at the Odeon Cinema in the centre of Bristol. Mum, I remember, was really keen for us to see the Disney version of Jungle Book because we had seen this fake version so many times. And she was under the impression that it would never be released on video. In fact, I think we all were around that time. Indeed, Disney kept such plans very secret, and seeing it at the cinema, even though it was re-released possibly for the third time at that point in the 1990s, it did indeed feel like a once-in-a-lifetime treat. I have memories of being somewhere after the cinema trip. Mum wanted to take the opportunity to go around some shops and suggested that me and my brother go to Debenhams, where they had a great big slide that went from the first floor, or possibly higher, all the way to the ground floor. And then the big slide was was a tube thing, and it was just for children to play in. I remember it as the kind of chute you might go down in a water park, except it was in the Debenhams store. The big one in the centre of Bristol that used to be there at the time. And you came out of the slider that, like I said, travelled between various floors of the building, and you didn't come out, you didn't splash down into water, but you splashed into a ball pit. And I think that day was the longest we ever got to spend playing on the Debenhams slide, the day after we'd just seen Jungle Book at the cinema, because we were full of beans when Mum picked us up after having visited her shops. And as we walked to the bus stop, Mum, thinking back to the movie she'd just seen for the first time since she was a little girl, probably a similar age to me and my brother, come to think of it, and asked us, how was that then? Oh, great, we said. Yeah, really cool. Mum looked at us. Really? You liked it? Yeah, we love that slide. That was our reply. We love the slide. Of course, Mum was asking us what we thought of the movie, and of course, we loved it. Who didn't love Jungle Book back then? The vultures. What should we do now then? Were just our favourite characters, and the naughty King of the Apes, of course, as well. Many elements of Disney's version of Jungle Book are not included in the fake Pickwick version of the Jungle Book released on video, beating Disney to the punch. Not least the songs themselves. They are missing, and in this version, Mowgli is he's very white for someone that's been born and raised in a jungle. So I do have fond memories of watching this fake version of Jungle Book many times, actually, because it was only Jungle Book, Lady and the Tramp, and Turner and Hooch, Nan and Grandad's video collection that would hold any interest at all to us back then. And being as they had something like 11 grandchildren and a few great-grandchildren as well, I guess the videos that they did have, some of them were bought with us in mind. I also remember the trailers at the end of the Pickwick video release of this fake Jungle Book. And me and brother really liked those trailers, probably more than the version of Jungle Book itself, actually. They included a really funny Toad of Toad Hall short and a little mini Treasure Island adventure, among other things. And in my notes here, I've got a little bit carried away because I've started to describe Nan and Grandad's video recorder. So for those who are interested in such things, I'll describe it here. Their video recorder looked more modern than the one we had at home. I can't remember the make, but it was black with a digital display at the front, and it was a front-loading VCR, I do remember that, and the buttons on the front of the machine were smaller, rounder, and not square buttons like the video recorder that we had at home. They were rounded and smaller. They looked smarter, sleeker. And I think they got a new TV cabinet with the video recorder, a black veneer job with glass doors for the video recorder to sit behind, and a drawer underneath in which the videotapes were stashed along with the remote. That seemed to us rather imposing and not very user-friendly for a remote. And I think Nan and Grandad at this time still had their old TV with the wood effect around it, with great big soft buttons to change the channel. And that TV, I don't think that had a remote. So being as they were in the habit of getting up and down to change the channel on the television, I assume the VCR remote stayed in the drawer, surplus as it was to requirements, really. So that's my memories of watching a fake Jungle Book released by Pickwick Video in the early 1990s. If I can find the will to upload it to YouTube, then I will do that and link this podcast to it, because I think some people might enjoy seeing it. And hey, what's a copyright infringement between friends? We're going to change gears now and talk about The Man in Room 17. Now, I've talked about The Man in Room 17 on previous podcasts, but I'm just going to give you a little recap now. The Man in Room 17 was made in 1967 by Granada Television, and it was a bit of an experimental piece of television because the idea was that the regular actors would be in their regular set, which would be the Room 17 set, and those scenes would be filmed with a different director and on a different day entirely to all the other scenes of the story. So the characters in Oldenshire and Dimmock, the men in Room 17, they very rarely meet the other characters in the story. They are puppet masters, puppeteers, working things from behind the scenes. Sometimes they have an agent, a kind of boots on the ground person to report back to them, and they issue instructions via telephone and telegram and things like that. So Oldenshire and Dimmock are very much in the background. And I have been researching The Man in Room 17 and watching a lot of The Man in Room 17 because I'm currently in the middle of writing a book about it. It's a bit of an odd endeavour, I think, to write a book about a television show that most people do not remember. However, writing the book, I have found that this is a bit of a window into television of the era. Specifically television made by ITV and Granada. So I've done quite a bit for the book, and I'm going to give you a little sneak preview because this is the story of how The Man in Room 17 began. It started with young executive Sir Dennis Foreman, who joined the newly established Granada Television in 1954 and was one of the few people working there when the owners, Cecil and Sidney Bernstein, were awarded a franchise contract with the newly formed independent television to make and broadcast programmes in the north of England. Dennis Foreman's first job for Granada was buying new furnishings and help new production personnel sign their contracts. But Foreman wanted to be involved in the programme making side of things, and soon enough he got his wish. Starting with serious programmes, Foreman created current affairs programmes to appeal to young audiences, and What the Papers Say, in which a panel would take a look at how the nation's press were reporting the news of the day. As a new decade began to dawn, however, Foreman's remit expanded to include drama and other types of entertainment. And Foreman echoed the sentiments of Sidney Bernstein, seeing Granada as on the same level playing field as the so-called big boys in London, and considered themselves the alternative to what they believed was the paternalistic, almost puritanical output of the British Broadcasting Corporation. Foreman was at the forefront of helping to create new shows and drive new concepts. And one of these was The Man in Room 17. Whoever first had the idea of The Man in Room 17 is something that is lost in the mists of time, but Dennis Foreman is highly likely to be the candidate, for it was Foreman who had formulated Triangle, a series of short but linked 15-minute plays. As his responsibilities increased, it seems probable that Foreman began to eye the production budget sheets more carefully. Bringing his imagination and the creative freedom prevalent at Granada Television to bear, it seems almost inevitable that he considered making one programme in half the time an almost irresistible challenge. The idea, as I touched on a moment ago, would be for one writer to script the scenes in which the main characters would appear, and that by some dint of the format would mean that they would stay more or less in their room. In other words, staying on the same set. This would allow a second director and his unit to film all the other scenes on separate sets. Even if perfect simpatico could not be achieved, there existed the possibility that such an approach could be refined if it were to save money and to deliver pleasing results in the ratings. One of the most respected writers at Granada, a chap called Philip Mackey, was often sent out to watch plays and hang around theatres in order to find new talent for the rapidly expanding company. One of his finds was Robin Chapman, who was encouraged to submit material for Triangle. From there, Chapman was asked to devise characters and a format for Foreman's experimental project. Dennis Foreman probably reckoned he'd picked the best writer for the job, and likewise the best producer, because Richard Everett rose from the position of floor manager to become, amongst other things during his time at Granada, a producer. He had an inbuilt prudence when it came to budgets, once commenting on the development of future drama as no scenery, just black drapes and clever lighting. Substitute black drapes for green and we begin to see how forward-thinking the top people at Granada really were. So with a producer keen on cost-cutting and a script editor willing to allow the head writer space to develop his voice, and the pieces that make up the strange entity that we now know as the Man in Room 17 begin to fall into place. And the Man in Room 17, when it all started, it received some good pre-publicity in the run-up as well, most notably a picture of actor Richard Vernon, who played the character of Oldenshaw, on the cover of the TV Times. And as part of a long-running agreement with Rediffusion, the London branch of independent television, Granada would provide programming for a franchise time slot, which of course meant that all 13 episodes of The Man in Room 17 Series 1 enjoyed national exposure. So they got broadcast at the same time across all ITV regions. Now, if that little story interests you, then it may interest you to know that very soon my book, The Man in Room 17, will be available for pre-order shortly. So watch this space, as we used to say back in the 90s. Now, one of the things I would like to do on the podcast today is to just give a little plug to the website that I used to edit noscriptforlife.com. I think actually today it's noscriptforlife.wordpress.com, but if you just type noscriptforlife.com into your address bar, it will come up. And I've been writing for that website now for about do I need to say a number? Should I say a number? 6 years, I think. Anyway, long story short, I have spent the last week tidying up noscriptforlife.com. I used to go in for all these giant fonts. I don't know what I was thinking. All these gigantic fonts, all these massive typefaces everywhere, all these enormous pictures and things. It looks very nice and cheerful, but it didn't shout "read me." So I've spent the last week or so just tidying it up, giving it a real spruce up, and I'm really happy with the way it looks. So happy, in fact, that I'm now prepared to tell you the website's address on the podcast. I'm going to give you a little preview of what's on there. Something that I wrote a little while ago, and was happy to sort of revisit and touch up for the new look, noscriptforlife.com. It was a piece I wrote called "Was Douglas Wilmer the Definitive Sherlock Holmes?" So it's worth talking about, actually, because I really enjoyed Douglas Wilmer's version of Sherlock Holmes. So let's give you a little bit of backstory, really. So Douglas Wilmer was already a well-established actor when he was selected to portray Sherlock Holmes in a new series of TV adaptations made by the BBC back in 1964. With his Hawk-like appearance and sturdy build, it kind of made him a perfect candidate for the part. However, he did have his detractors within the BBC who cited Wilmer as an imperfect choice. And after much wrangling with the Conan Doyle estate over usage rights to the original stories, the project was almost indefinitely shelved. Amidst the tumult, the American backers pulled out of the project, forcing the BBC to downgrade their new series from one produced entirely on film and in colour to a multi-camera, studio-bound black and white recording. Already, the production was doomed to look dated not long after broadcast, especially as colour TV was fast becoming established in the lucrative US market, which the BBC hoped to tap with this series. But with the problems aside, filming did go ahead with a series of inexperienced directors at the helm. And as a result, some of the scripts in the series are alleged to have been in such a shocking state the actors had to rewrite them in rehearsals. Despite his unhappiness at being directed by fledgling newcomers instead of the industry-leading professionals he'd been promised, 13 episodes were produced with Wilmer as Holmes and Nigel Stock playing Dr. Watson. On their original broadcast in 1965, these episodes sank like pebbles in a lake. But luckily, an empty slot in the schedules a year later allowed for a repeat run, and that time the series found popularity with UK viewers. And since then, the series has never been repeated or seen on network television outside of Europe. Yet, for the few million people that saw his performance in the 1960s, Douglas Wilmer remains the definitive Sherlock Holmes. But is there any substance to this? Well, in 1965, Peter Cushing and Jeremy Brett were yet to star in anything as Holmes. So when considering Wilmer's definitive status, it is important to put his portrayal into the context of the time. And there's worth mentioning, of course, that there's so much nuance and thought in Wilmer's performance. Only a true fan of the original stories could ever insert such detail. The faithful adaptation to the original text is something that sets the portrayal apart from what came before it. And as good as they were, and as classy as it was, the film starring Basil Rathbone, they do drive a bit of a bulldozer through the Holmes canon, don't they? Anyone who's seen the series of movies made during the height of World War II know that they take drastic liberties with Holmes, the supporting characters, not to mention the stories themselves. Rathbone's Holmes is a genial, mild-mannered gentleman with an even temperament. He is not remote, he is not socially awkward, he is jocular with social graces and superb manners. I guess you could say that Holmes is a more conventional hero in those films, and which is probably what audiences needed at the time, in fairness. And Watson is turned into a bumbling, grousing half-wit. Now, I'm not here to denigrate Nigel Bruce's portrayal of Holmes's erstwhile biographer in those films, as others seem to do. As far as I'm concerned, he plays the part that's written in the script and does so effortlessly. And the same can be said of Rathbone. But as entertaining as those movies are, for some Holmes fans, they're unscrupulous, there we go, third time lucky, unscrupulous deviance from the source text is a constant source of irritation. Little wonder, then, that the arrival of Douglas Wilmer's carefully considered portrayal was considered definitive by UK viewers in 1965. But how does this version of the Great Detective measure up against those that have come since? Well, it's common to see the definitive tag pinned very firmly to the chest of Jeremy Brett, the star of 41 fine episodes made by Granada Television in the 1980s and 90s. And if you've ever seen some of those episodes, especially the early ones, they're called The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, it's easy to see why you would pin the definitive Holmes tag squarely onto the chest of Jeremy Brett. We talk about Douglas Wilmer bringing knowing nuance to his performance, but that's nothing compared to the tics, grunts, and tender flourishes instilled by Brett. The things he does with the character in the first 20 episodes or so of his run are simply masterful, but it would be to deny the truth of the situation to pretend that excellence of the earlier episodes continues throughout the series. As many of us know, Brett's health declines dramatically as they made the series, and the later episodes suffer from too many avant-garde directorial flourishes to pad out Conan Doyle's short stories to 50 or sometimes 90 minutes of drama. The authenticity of the early episodes become compromised by the script's need to accommodate Brett's failing health and stretch out a story that was originally less than 20 pages in length. The Dying Detective, The Mazarian Stone, and The Last Vampire are by far the worst examples of the directorial excesses and source text deviation. But it isn't just the actor's portrayal that counts toward a definitive Holmes. The intention to stay true to Conan Doyle's original stories is also an important ingredient. Jeremy Brett is probably better remembered for his earlier episodes, and if we go by those alone, he may very well be the definitive TV version of Baker Street's finest detective. In between Wilmer and Brett, another actor came very close to making the part his own and has a fair claim to the title of definitive himself. When the BBC declined to engage Douglas Wilmer's services for another run of Holmes stories in the late 1960s, they called upon Peter Cushing, who had recently played the part opposite Christopher Lee in Hammer's Hound of the Baskervilles, made in 1959. Sadly, only 5 of the Cushing episodes survive to be enjoyed today. Again, Nigel Stock is ensconced as a very different type of Watson to the one that viewers have been accustomed to, thanks to Nigel Bruce's performance in those aforementioned films. And the stories continue to be faithful to the original text in the Cushing series. Now, Cushing is a little sharper, a little less accessible than Wilmer's distant, brooding Holmes. He suffers fools even less gladly and seems to feel the weight of his own celebrity on his shoulders. There are contrasts in the performance, and the camaraderie between the Baker Street residents is a little thinner on the ground when Cushing takes the helm. Whilst I make this point, it is worth noting we're comparing 5 Peter Cushing episodes to the 11 that still exist starring Douglas Wilmer, so perhaps to go on this evidence alone is a little unfair, yet it is easy to see strong contrasts in the evidence that is available. So Cushing's run of episodes, they're actually in colour, and they were made to a far higher standard in both terms of physical production and in terms of the scripts. The calibre of guest actors remains just as high in the Cushing series, and their devotion to Conan Doyle's stories is just as present. Until I saw Douglas Wilmer, I actually considered Cushing the definitive Holmes and Stock as the ultimate Watson. But casting our net a little wider, it's hard to allow any other actor anywhere near the coveted title of definitive. One-off productions can't count really, can they? How can you be definitive of something when you only do it once? But there was Tom Baker, anyway, in Hound of the Baskervilles in 1983. He was nowhere near the original, though entertaining nonetheless. And the same can be said of Rupert Everett, in fairness, in Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Silk Stocking, produced in 2004. Everett's portrayal, just a word for that though, because if you've not seen The Case of the Silk Stocking and you are a fan of Holmes, then you do need to see Rupert Everett play the character. He's a much younger Holmes. He's full of energy and sardonic put-downs. And he rushes through the story like a man possessed, but he is effortless to watch and instantly compelling in the part. It's probably no exaggeration to say his performance in the role may very well have earned him the crown of definitive had he continued on. Movie portrayals suffer similarly to television one-offs in that there just isn't enough evidence to go on to build a picture of whether or not the actor's portrayal could be considered definitive. I don't think anyone considers Christopher Lee in the films Sherlock Holmes in America and Sherlock Holmes and the Leading Lady, both made in 1991, or as definitive. And I think the same can be said of Robert Downey Jr.'s take on the role in the mid-noughties. And the same must be said of the various stage productions over the years, except perhaps for William Gillette's original stage plays, Gillette being the first actor to ever portray the character of Sherlock Holmes for an audience. Arthur Watner made a contemporary splash, of course. As with his screen predecessors, he is now mainly remembered by Holmes aficionados and unlikely to be remembered by most audiences by the time Douglas Wilmer's version of Holmes hit the small screens some 40 years later. There have been other notable small screen portrayals over the years of Holmes. Benedict Cumberbatch, whilst sublime in Sherlock, is too far removed from the original character to be considered here. Geoffrey Whitehead's Holmes, with Donald Pickering as Watson in Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, made in 1979 and produced for Polish television, are pretty good, but there's not a lot of evidence going on there. But Geoffrey Whitehead's portrayal is interesting and is worth a look if you're interested. And of course, there's Ron Howard's short-lived series for American audiences in the mid-1960s. Both have never been shown in any other country other than the ones that they were made for. So it's not really possible to get into debate concerning the actor's definitive status. Certainly Ronald Howard was extremely popular in his day, but both series that I just mentioned, they tend to stray from the Conan Doyle narrative, sometimes slightly, sometimes completely. And if we've already established adherence to the source text is a major contributing factor in any discussion of definitive portrayal, then that automatically discounts those aforementioned series and also Elementary and the Young Sherlock Holmes series as well on the same grounds. So until the 1980s, Carla and Hobbs was considered the best Sherlock Holmes of the radio airwaves, but that radio series ran for just 12 episodes, and whilst they are concise and true to the original stories, and I can say I've listened to a few and they're pretty good actually, they were superseded, in my opinion, by the arrival of Clive Merrison and writer Bert Coules, who between them provide perhaps not just one of the most definitive takes on the character of Holmes, but also the definitive Holmes series, in my opinion. In the series where Clive Merrison plays Sherlock Holmes, every original story is accounted for, and throughout the complete run of 60 stories, there is an adherence to the source material that will not be shaken off. All of the original characterization is present, and the relationship between Holmes and Watson and the various life events that they experience, such as Watson's marriage and then subsequent widowhood, they are all present and correct, complementing the story of the week with a melancholy that isn't just true to the canon, but true to life as well. Clive Merrison's Holmes leaps from the printed page into your ears and loses nothing in translation. He is delivered exactly as Conan Doyle put the words on the page 150 years ago. At turns irascible, loud, solemn, stubborn, and romantic, his is the embodiment of the character originally created. He is accompanied by a Watson who is not a cipher or overly empathic, but a realistic man with his own morals and codes on the edge of a breakdown when we first meet him. if we're having discussions about who and who isn't the most definitive, the most true, and frankly, the best Holmes ever, then Clive Merrison's name cannot be omitted. But what of Holmes on screen? Is Douglas Wilmer the definitive Sherlock? There's certainly enough evidence. 13 episodes starring Douglas Wilmer and featuring among them the only screen adaptation of The Retired Colourman, the only surviving adaptation of The Beryl Coronet, and a more faithful version of The Disappearance of Lady Frances Carfax than Granada made. So we're eternally blessed by the selection of stories for the series because they cover every facet of Holmes' character, from the brooding internal retreat of the Devil's Foot to his indecent haste to scupper the plans of Augustus Milverton in the episode of the same name. There's even a rare comedic take on the Six Napoleons to enjoy. There is one thing about the Douglas Wilmer series that irks me, and I have to say it, and that's the deerstalker hat is worn by Holmes practically everywhere, even indoors in some scenes. As most people with a passing acquaintance in Victorian sartorial fashion will know, the deerstalker is a hat normally worn in the countryside, so it's a little unusual for someone with Holmes's superlative sense of dress to have such a strange attraction to the hat. And it's not entirely out of step with the character. If Sherlock likes the hat, then fashion be damned, and you can almost hear him say it. My dear Watson, the hat is quite immaterial. It is the function of the organ that lies beneath it that one should observe. The error is not in putting Holmes in the hat, regardless of the setting. The error is in failing to acknowledge it. The interactions between Dr. Watson and the consulting detective is just as you'd expect. Admiration and grudging respect on both sides, mixed with humour, candour and occasional awkwardness. There's a very sound reason why the services of Nigel Stock were retained for the Peter Cushing series that came after. He is, up to this point, at least the personification of the perfect Watson. Watch it if you don't believe me. But who is the definitive Holmes? Is it Wilmer? It's difficult because I can't tell you who the definitive Holmes is. I think only you can decide. When you read or listen to, say, the Naval Treaty or Silver Blaze, does Holmes have a face? If so, whose face is he wearing for you? Is it Peter Cushing's, Jeremy Brett's, perhaps Basil Rathbone's, or Clive Merrison's? Maybe it's Christopher Lee or Geoffrey Whitehead. The face you see on your Holmes will tell you who your definitive Holmes really is. Unless, of course, you're like me, and when you're reading the stories, you no longer see a face. Holmes, for me, is a faceless figure, larger than life and better at it than most. He's tall and agile and dexterous, whether he's lounging beside the fire, puffing on his pipe, or at the window, gazing out, or playing mournfully on the violin. For me, the character has no face. But when he puts down the violin and turns to me, I see a fire behind the eyes, a blazing inferno fueled by pure and perfect ecstasy of a mystery to solve. And in that moment, Sherlock Holmes, the great consulting detective, for me, wears the face of, you don't really want to know, do you? So there we go. That is a preview of just one of the articles you can find on noscriptforlife.com. That's all I have time for this time around. You've been listening to The View with Martin Gregory. This is a fortnightly podcast giving you audiobook reviews, ramblings about old-time television, and anything else that I think you might be interested in. Next time around, I will be talking about my ongoing WWE watch through as we have just come out of WWE Fastlane 2015 and heading into WrestleMania 31. I have been putting off watching the last 3 episodes of Series 3 of The Bill. I have been savouring them, and next time I shall tell you why. I have also just finished watching an excellent series about Edward VIII and Mrs. Simpson, who would be queen, and of course didn't get to be as he abdicated. It's a great story, and it was given a very good adaptation in the late 1970s by ITV. So I'll be talking about that next time, especially as I managed to find a couple of parallels between myself and the late great Edward VIII. How about that? I'll also be talking about All Gas and Gators. That's the radio series that I've been listening to and very, very much enjoyed. And I have also got to tell you, because I've got to get it off my chest and tell somebody, otherwise I'm going to go a little bit mad, about what I think is one of the creepiest damn science fiction serials I have ever heard. Creepy. I've got goosebumps just thinking about it. Yeah. Lots of dodgy AI and yes, I'm not going to say any more than that because it's just too damn creepy. I don't want to go down that route. So, but the upshot is that there's plenty to talk about next time on the View podcast. Thank you for listening to the View podcast with me, Martin Gregory. If you would like to read more, then you can, of course, subscribe to The View on Substack. And don't forget to visit noscriptforlife.com or noscriptforlife.wordpress.com if you prefer. Bye for now.